Hello, Harry Baker here. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new something borrowed, and I'm feeling good. This week slash month slash day slash year, depending on your preference, we have got the fantastic Rachel Long, who I got to do this with during lockdown over Instagram Live. To do it again in person was an absolute delight. She has got poetry knowledge for days. She has also got poems. Those two things combined really help when you're doing a poetry-based podcast. I hope you enjoy it. Before I bring on our very special guest, I would like to share something old with you. And this poem was inspired by a couple of things. One is that I went for a swim with my friend Anna last week, and I hadn't been in since sort of summer. Afterwards, I wore sort of 7 layers, including like a dry robe, a hoodie, a jumper, a few t-shirts, and it still took me about an hour to sort of get any feeling back in my body. And it made me realize how much I'd sort of missed that acclimatization period. So this poem is about a time when I was swimming much more regularly. And the second thing that reminded me of it was that today I was out on the tidal pool doing a photo shoot for my next sort of tour poster for my book that's coming out, all about sort of poems about my son. So my vision for the sort of poster was I would get the pram that we had when he was a sort of newborn baby and have it on the tidal pool wall, and then wait for when the tide sort of just comes in and sort of starts lapping over. So it would be sort of like Jesus walking on water kind of vibe, but also sort of that kind of precariousness and preciousness and fragile nature of it. And completely impractical to do as a photo shoot. You've got a lot of waiting around and then a lot of panic. But also there was someone from the shore who just saw me and someone else sort of taking a pram out to sea and waiting, and to their credit, lovely woman called Caroline, she waited until we came back just to check that there wasn't a baby in the pram, and then very helpfully said, "Oh, I've got some extra footage for you if you'd like." And so she sent over the videos she took, which kind of visually are quite stunning, but there is a voiceover afterwards saying, "Oh my God, I'm going to have to call the RNLI." So all of that is to say, I have a lot of fondness for the tidal pool, and I mentioned lockdown already. One thing that me and a friend did was we decided to sort of swim every day throughout one of those winters because it was the only thing that really kept us going. So this is simply called Wild. I've never regretted going for a swim, even on the days I have almost talked myself out of it. When the warm duvet clings to me like seaweed. When on the way the wind whispers it's not too late to turn back. When I'm stood on the edge and shivering before I have even begun. Deep breath, feet clench. And yet the second I am in, it is all worth it. Okay, 5 seconds after I am in, it is all worth it. Sometimes every single time it still surprises me how cold it is. My technique is less Wim Hof, more grunt like warthog. Flail limbs underwater until things begin to warm up. When the cold hits you, it becomes impossible to think of anything else. And this year of all years, that is not nothing. Jessie is my swim buddy. We both went every day through lockdown 2. We've carried on in tier 3, even more in tier 4. At least they can't shut down the sea. Jessie is hardcore, like proper puts her face in. Like casually brings up doing a 5K race in conversation. Barista trained, she brings a thermos and spare mug for coffee after. I think it's honestly the greatest thing I've ever tasted. I love how much I do not need to be the best at this. Each day the fact I am in at all is an achievement. And this year of all years, that is not nothing. Whether it's wetsuit with the hands and feet or swimsuit with a beanie hat, a full-on lap, a there and back, often not even that. The safe word is stiff chewing gum, as in the texture that your muscles feel when they are begging you to get out. Even through winter, we've met fellow swimmers every time we've gone, exchange a brief hello and "oh, it's cold," or simply just the nod. Realize how much this year we've bonded through a shared sense of complaining, whereas here the default setting becomes, "Isn't this amazing?" Whether grimacing or grinning, you can see it in our eyes. Skin is pink and we are thinking, what a time to be alive. A dog walker on the way home chuckles, rather you than me. I can't help thinking to myself, I rather do agree. As the feeling teases back into my fingers, stood in the shower, waffles and sausages heating up in the oven. I am already looking forward to tomorrow. And this year of all years, that is not nothing. Thank you so much. So as I mentioned, part of this festival is trying to celebrate local writers. And when I heard that, there was one person who's been on my list for a while, but who is newly local. And so it was a perfect excuse to sort of invite them back out. I managed to have a conversation with Rachel when this was over sort of Instagram Live with sort of clap emojis and desolation for accompaniment. And even through that, warmth and brilliance and stunning poetry came through. So I'm so excited to share a stage, share a room, and share a warm, lovely audience as yourselves with her. So please welcome to the stage the fantastic Rachel Long. You up for doing something old?
Yes.
Come on.
Old. Thank you, Harry. Something old. So I'm going to read what I think, bless you, what I think is the oldest poem in my collection. So, and Harry said the last time that we did this was like 2020 when this book came out. And what I think is the oldest poem, and all the poets in the room will know that the iterations of poems and the redrafts of poems are much older than even where they're contained in the book. And also I thought of this because I saw a profile pic of the person who is mentioned in this poem. And she was on holiday with her family, and her daughter is now older than we are when we met. And they look gorgeous. They're on holiday, and I was like, what is this hello cover you've got going on here? Because that's the kind of crap that we used to read back in the day. Anyway, it's called Sandwiches. Tiff's got me against the school railings, doing my eyeliner. In double French, I'd whispered, your eyes, will you make mine like that? Slice through a room, a lie, a man, break time her body on mine, stush, then soft, sugar on the tongue of all she hasn't done yet, all she's heard she could do. Already Tiff's a reckoning, bomb glitter on lids, oil spill on lips, sandwiches, padding her bra. Yeah, the sandwiches, thick, white, unbuttered. See, Tiff's clocked the difference. Tiff's clocked, the boys have clocked the difference between a tissue and a tit, a sock and a tit, but not quite yet a tit and a slice of bread. Oh, girl. You have opened my eyes, how they weep.
Come on. Thank you so much. I guess one thing I wanted to ask, because the last time we spoke, this book was brand new, and how do you feel about it 5 years? And I guess poems like that are already such a snapshot of a moment, but like you say, to then see them even more grown up with kids, and that kind of almost crystallizes these moments as you go on. How do you feel about the book as a whole 5 years on? Are there certain poems that you've become more fond of or can't stand the sight of anymore? Is it the ones you expected that have kind of stuck with you?
Good question. There are some in the book that I would take out if I could just, but it would only be my copy or the copies that I've got at home. You know, I can't go around everywhere pulling out pages. There are, and I say to people, so I do a lot of sort of mentoring or like consulting with people on like especially like their first manuscripts as well, which is I love to do. Secondly, to like actually writing myself, but it's such a privilege as well. And I always say, like, when you're about to have it published, like, don't do the thing because the train's leaving, just chuck in some poems. I panicked. Did you have this? Like, I panicked and I was like, actually, what about this one? And it's those that I'm like, that's the ones that I want to rip out. And I should have just trusted that the train was leaving, and I shouldn't have chucked anything else on it.
I think I've done that before, in part because to me it felt like a miracle that I had a book's worth of poems. I was like, this is basically my whole, especially like my first bit, it's like my whole life has led up to this. I don't know if I'll next have another collection or when that will happen. So the fact that I've got this one sort of fledgling poem that feels like it might be something, if I wait until the next book, that might be in 30 years' time when paper no longer exists. You know, all of this. It was sort of like, if I don't put it in, will I regret that? Because actually, by the time the next book comes around, this poem about this very specific moment in my life might not feel like it belongs, or might not feel relevant anymore. So it almost feels like that's the, if it's going to have a home, it has to go in there. But then again, once it's in print, there's something so permanent about it. And I think for me, so that first poem was from my second collection, and so much of that collection came out of COVID and lockdown and the kind of feelings within. But I was so aware even at that moment that I didn't want to mention COVID. And it, at the time, it was all anyone knew and could think of, but I knew how quickly, people were sick of it and didn't want to think about it, but also how it would kind of date it. So then I think it's interesting as well how over time things age themselves or that kind of thing. And so what is it that you like about shaping people's collections? Because I think it's such an art, and I think whenever I get asked to sort of give feedback on other people's poems, that's not a skill that I feel like I have, or not something that I enjoy. I think for me, my favourite feedback is well done, and that's not very like helpful when someone's doing a collection. So I think to be able to be sort of encouraging and not necessarily even critical, but to be able to kind of help someone find their own voice, I think is such a gift. And how is it for you, I guess, taking each people's poetry and voice as its own thing, whilst also sort of sharing your knowledge and your personal taste and that kind of thing?
Yeah, that is hard. And sometimes, well, I don't find it hard because I never want to insert myself on anybody else's work. I'm like, why don't you write like me? I hope that I'm not that much of a wanker. Yeah, you don't want to be a heavy-handed editor. You don't want to be like, have you been working with... Because sometimes you can kind of hear who someone's been working with in the work. I think staying curious is really good. So if I don't understand something or a reference, and it's like, I really love that one-to-one because you can really talk through what someone intends. And therefore, as a reader, all I ever want to feed back is kind of like, okay, everything you've just told me is not quite yet in the poem. And what do you want in the poem to communicate that? And then they're like, oh yeah, I didn't mention that it's about, I don't know, a particular death of someone really significant in their life. And actually they've sort of put a lot of smoke around it because it's maybe hard for them to write and things like that. So basically I only want to just kind of listen and maybe draw out exactly what do you want to communicate? Okay, this is what I'm reading. How can we make the poem meet both things? Yeah. So it's like a working out thing. Like
my editor for this latest collection, I felt was so generous in their feedback to me in terms of that thing of just being curious. Well, no, not even. That's what I was sort of hoping for. But I think in particular, because my next book is 100 poems from the first 100 days of my son's life. So by its very nature, some of them are quite raw and unpolished, and others I've kind of gone back to and wanted to work on further. But there were just one or two poems where my editor said, it might be me sort of being dense, but this currently doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. If that's what you're going for, if you're trying to sort of capture the mania of new parenthood, you've done that really well. But if you were trying to perhaps make a sort of more salient point, then would you care to reconsider? And I thought I would feel more precious about it. I thought I would kind of find that really difficult to take on. But actually so much of it is about having that relationship and that trust that this is actually someone who knows what they're doing and who has your best interest at heart and who wants to make the work the best thing it can be. Whereas previously I was in a musical comedy duo, and whenever we got feedback from our agent, it felt much more just sort of unconsidered and corporate and sort of like, can you be more like Russell Howard, please? And that there wasn't a mutual trust there. Yeah. So that felt like it was a much more fractious relationship, where it was only kind of doing this that I've realised the value in that. Mm-hmm. And is it people reaching out to you because they want what you have to offer, or is it a mixture? Just in terms of building that trust with people, how does that work?
Sometimes it's if I've already had the chance to work with them through sort of workshops, and so there'll be like 15 people there, and then they're already working on something, or and then they'll be like, do you do this? Do you do like one-to-ones? Occasionally it comes through like organisations, like the Arvin Foundation, which are really beautiful. And you can go on retreats, like to Ted Hughes's 2 houses on like sort of opposite ends of the country. Like one's in Lumbank, where he lived with Sylvia Plath. Or that might be Totley Barton. Anyway, he had houses. Or no, Lumbank, which is in like West Yorkshire, and then Totley Barton, which is in Devon. And they're really gorgeous. And then there's another one called the Hurst, which is in Shropshire. So like retreats like that are really beautiful in terms of, again, like meeting people, working closely, because like to go on a retreat and to be in like a far-flung place away and to dedicate that time to writing is amazing. And so you already sort of within that week, even if you're teaching a group, you're already sort of cultivating a certain amount of not trust. I wouldn't want to say that someone's like, you trust me, don't you? Because then you're always going to be a weirdo. But a certain amount of, again, maybe curiosity about each other and what you can maybe like offer each other, or in terms of just, it would be exciting to work together. Not always. Occasionally it can be awful. And you're like, I don't think I'm the right fit for you or your work.
Before we move on to something new, because I'm very excited to ask you about that, something that is newer to you is Margate.
Yeah.
How long have you been here? How is that feeling for you?
Strictly, my tenancy began on the 31st of January, but it took me about a week to move. So actually, I was just going up and down in a van, moving stuff. So I'd say early Feb.
Okay.
Early Feb.
We moved down in January, and I quite liked moving in the middle of winter, because then you're there at its most sort of charming. But, you know, like you're hunkering down, and then it kind of slowly opens up, and you realise that actually loads of places are just closed for winter because they can't be bothered, rather than it being like permanently boarded up. And you kind of see that. And I think the flip side is people who sort of come during Margate Pride and see it like in all of its glory, and then think, oh, amazing, and then move down and are sort of shocked. But I guess my follow-up question is, have you been in the sea?
I have been in the sea once. When you were reading your poem, I was just like, oh my God. It was peak August. Whatever our hottest day was, that was the only day that I was like, okay, all right, I'll do it. And it was lovely.
And it was enough.
It was like the 25th of August or something like that. I just don't like being cold, just full stop, like in water, in my house. I just don't like being cold. But I respect it. Whenever I see someone, actually see swimming, I'm like, I'm the dog walker.
Yes.
Rather
well, I feel like that's very Margate, is you've got dogs.
I have got dogs. They can be beach dogs now. I love it. Well, no, I only had one when I moved here. Then I was like, oh, this space is just so lovely. I'll get another one, which is not good for writing. Anyone who's like really wants to concentrate on a body of work, don't get a puppy. Do not get a puppy. Don't do it.
Incredible. Are you up for me sharing something new? And then
yes,
I want to ask you
please.
more. So it's new in terms of content, because it's from my new book, but also this book was new for me in terms of craft and method, I guess, because when I started writing, I did a lot of sort of poetry slams, which were kind of 3 minutes long, and you got judged at the end of it. And so I got very good at wrapping things up neatly, or having one poem that just captured everything I wanted to say on a particular theme, and sort of ended on a pun. And then with this, I wasn't initially intending to write anything at all. It started off as these kind of fragmented notes on my phone, but by its very nature, there's 100 poems that are all about the same thing, but in very different parts. And on a really practical level, it was easier to have some shorter ones in there too. So, but in terms of thinking about how poems have aged, I'm just going to read you 2 short poems that at the time felt like the most important thing in the world. And I've since sort of come to realize that it was just a particular day. So this is part 1, and it's called Professional Help. We call upon the one that pacifies, to some simply the soother, or just dummy, as in what I was, to not have tried this sooner. And then part 2 is just called Sucker. I lost the dummy and replaced it with my finger, which by all accounts was going well, at least until upon closer inspection, you realise Daddy's full of lies instead of milk. And that was genuinely 2 days in a row. And on that first day, when he first sort of took a dummy, I thought, oh, this is obviously why I've seen lots of kids with dummies. This is amazing. And then he never used it ever again. And that's not a part of our lives anymore. But to have written it in that moment and for it to felt so urgent, it now feels like that's something that's embedded in that memory. And I think part of what's interesting for me is so many of these poems I would have forgotten entirely because I wasn't sleeping and my mind is sort of mush. Whereas to now have that and to kind of think about how that exists going forwards and what you choose to crystallize and what you choose to kind of let go, I found interesting. Are you up for sharing something?
Yeah, but can I ask you a quick question about that? Did you just, 100 poems as the framework, did you decide that? When did you decide that? Were you like, right, this little one's born, I'm going to write 100 poems for the first 100 days? Or was it that you had to, was it, I don't know, at day 3 that you were like, I should be maybe poetically documenting this?
It was, the first 2 weeks were just in one sort of string of notes and consciousness. And then there were a couple of things in there that I thought that I was like pleased with. And then it got to a point where actually there was so much happening every day that felt like the best day of my life and then the worst day of my life and then everything in between, that it was a way of not only documenting it, but also this kind of daily practice of getting to the end of the day and thinking, what is it from today that, not that feels poem-worthy, but that I want to try and crystallize as its own moment, because it's not always the most obvious things that you want to put in there. And it was kind of then a really nice way of going through that period and trying to just, especially in those early days, to have some kind of moment of reflection and marking of it. And I think I just really loved doing that day to day, and I wasn't really editing them as I went. And it was probably when I got to about day 30 or 40 that I thought, like, 50 feels too short and I want it to be a nice round number. But then I think I wondered what would happen when I got to day 100, because I was in this kind of mode, and whether I would want to keep going. But actually, I then really loved that the following day, it was still amazing, but it was then just for us. And it was that difference in kind of documenting it. And also on a practical level, I thought, I have got 100 poems here that I need to go back to and edit. I can't do this forever. At one point I was like, oh, I'll do it every day for the first year. And then thought, that's not sustainable.
It reminds me of, there's a book by Terence Hayes called American Sonnets for My Past and Future Assassin. And he said that he was going to write a sonnet for every day that Trump was president the first time. Because he was just like, as a poet, like, I mean, I've voted, I've exercised my political power, and now what do I do in terms of protest as a poet? Like, what can I do? And so he was like, I can write. So he wrote a sonnet for every day. But so he has a book, American Sonnets for My Past and Future Assassin. But he said he got so locked into writing a sonnet every day that he was like, my editor was like, stop. Yeah. And he was like, they just keep coming out with sonnets, basically. And he was like, I just put them in a drawer now. So I'm really interested. I was really, that's really interesting that you were like, no, this is for us now.
Yeah. And I think partly I thought, I didn't know, well, initially I didn't know if it would be in a collection for other people to read, but I wanted to kind of have it. And then there was a real moment of thinking, I don't know if this collection will end up being 100 poems, or if it will just be like the ones that make sense, that are kind of picking and choosing. So, you know, like it represents that time, but it's a much more selective process. And it's just, and you know, you kind of merge a few together to feel more cohesive. Whereas part of it, I wanted to capture the day-to-day nature of it and the kind of emotional roller coaster. And actually some are much more involved and some are much sort of shorter and sweeter. And so I think I quite liked having that as a pressure to keep going without it feeling like I'm actually not gonna see my son for the next 100 days because I need to go and edit these poems. You know, like it felt really important to me that I was writing them while taking him for a walk or while I was sort of waking up in the middle of the night anyway. So it fit around our routine and our life. Also, it felt right for this moment and for this collection. And I guess, like, to speak to what I said earlier, I used to be surprised every time I wrote a new poem, or I wouldn't know if there would be another thing. Whereas part of it was me trusting that these are the poems for this collection for now. And then if I want to write a poem about anything else he does, like I still can, that can still go later, but also at some point I'll get over it and write a poem that's not about my son, and you know, that kind of thing. And sort of like allowing yourself to, because I think there is something about the process and about the kind of repetitive nature of it that it gets harder and then it gets easier and then you kind of find your rhythm within it. But also I think it's only once you stop that you have a chance to look back and see what you've been doing. Whereas I think, you know, I know someone who started writing a poem a day, again, during lockdown, and then they kept it going. So like they've done over 1,000, and you sort of think that's now, like that's for you as a creative process, that's brilliant. And I'm sure you have ones that you prefer to others, but that's hard to keep up with once it gets to that kind of sheer volume. So I think, again, it was sort of wanting it to be meaty enough without feeling kind of inaccessible.
It's a beautiful idea, and it's a gorgeous. Did you spy this? I don't think. This is really exciting. This is something new. This is the new cover, right?
This is the new cover. Hey. So, thank you. So one of the early poems is just a series of nicknames that we gave him, and one of them was Peachy Bum, and so they took that, and it's got a peach on the front. Which is better than a bum, I think, for in terms of... I might sell more copies, but in terms of the vibe you want to get across, it was hard to get the rights from Ben Shepherd. I really want to ask you about your something new. Do you want to do a poem first, or do you want to talk about what
Maybe I'll do the poem first,
yeah.
I think. I will just say, so this is, the Something New is from the new collection, which is not out yet. I don't have a mock-up of the book to show at all. It's called Sparrow on the Rooftop. I suppose the poems they sort of document, in a way, like, one of the worst times of my fucking life. Like, actually. I might read the first one, which I wasn't going to, but I'll read the first one. So this acts as a sort of a preface, sort of. That year you drank like a Tudor child. Not beer, but wine, like water, was dirty, your liver, your poor liver, crying out for mercy, an inflamed claw on the cracked tile bathroom floor of your body, which you hated more and more as the year wore into the next, till your skin no longer fit and you refused to go out anymore. The shame of saying hello to a cashier who knew you from before. What was out there anyway? More of the same. You were bored of everything, everyone. That year got worse. Your one pleasure was feeding the dog, then yourself. Drink, dry, drink. Starve, binge, purge, till your throat refused and you were left with a bin bag bulging, then rotting inside you. The bloat accumulated like night does, slow at first, then. Here you are, doubled, two bitches on the sofa, whining, barking for more. What? What? Something, anything from the hand of the dark.
Thank you so much. It feels so special to hear that in terms of it being part of this new thing. Where are you at in the process?
I've finished it. I've sent it to my editor. I'm fucking happy about that. Thank you. Yeah, it was a slog. I felt like I was, when people like doing like long distance running, or a marathon, and then you have the people on the like motorcycles with the camera going alongside. That's what I felt like I was doing the whole time I was writing that book.
Yeah, okay.
Like both being the runner and the camera motorbike person, and that was exhausting. Or slightly behind, there was a slight lag, and then sometimes I'd worry that I was exaggerating certain things to myself, so there might be poems, which is gross, but I was in a really messed up state anyway, so I was just like, what about doing more? Like the gremlin of the South, sort of. Or if I was working out a poem, so I'd already written it, but I was trying to work out, like, actually, what's the essence of it? What am I getting at here? Kind of thing. Not act it out in real life, but sort of try and work it out in real life. Yeah. But so the book's about, like, disorder, specifically probably eating disorder, desire. It was after a bad breakup, like the worst. And just like, what is the body in desire and then without it? Yeah. Desire, depression, and disorder, I'd say. Yeah. 3 Ds, but that's the only one that I probably, wanted at that particular time.
But I think that's really interesting because in a way, for a long time, I wouldn't write about things while I was in them. I would wait until there'd been some kind of conclusion or closure, and then a poem's a nice way of sort of wrapping it up and almost sort of giving yourself the neat version of history or the kind of learning that you've taken from it. Totally. Whereas to write about something while you're in it and the power that committing a narrative to the page has to then shape who you are and as you're doing it, I think is really interesting.
Yeah, interesting. I wouldn't recommend it.
Sure.
Like as a process, it's messed up. But there was no other way that I felt like I could get out of it without writing myself out of it. Yeah. But that's the only time that I felt like that, just in this body of work.
And at what point did you think this is now a collection? Because obviously every collection starts with a poem and then you're building it up. Or was that not in your mind? You were just writing because you had to?
It started as a novel. I tried to write a novel first, is because I felt the way that I felt so expansive. I didn't think a poem could contain it, or even a sequence of poems or a collection of poems. I felt like it was too big, and I felt like I was also trying to work out, perhaps even in a way, like where the relationship went wrong, or way back to like why I was kind of so messed up by it. And all that for a poem, like poems are beautiful, my first love. But it just, sometimes we as as artists, sometimes there's a different medium for a particular like idea or concept. And I felt like that, and I was like, actually, maybe this is a novel. Which was silly of me, because I've never written a novel before. I was going through the hardest thing of my life, and then I was like fucking writing in the dark. And that was not a good idea. But I did it till the end. And it's only when I sort of gave it to my editor and to my agent. Well, no, my editor liked, my agent was a bit more like, don't think you know what the novel is. It's not just an accumulation, a relentless accumulation of pages about how you feel. And so I went back to my first love. I went back to the poem. And it was always going to be a poetic novel, so there were poems running throughout. And then I took those and I reworked those. And anything from the prose that I felt would work well in the poem. So even what you just read, Harry, like those little tiny snippets, like some of those are in the book, which are just like really tiny, to kind of tell a poetic narrative of it. But it was a novel to begin with. So I don't know if that answers your question. Did I just start? I started with what the fuck's going on, and then was trying to work it out. Yeah. Is that a good? Yeah, definitely. I still don't know, obviously. Yeah.
But I think it's interesting in terms of different ideas having different mediums or kind of needed to get out. Because again, for so long, my main way of expressing stuff was performing my poems out loud.
I found that really interesting.
And so that was how I would judge a poem's success, was whether it connected with the room in the way that I had hoped it could. In an immediate
sense as well, right?
And that's tricky because every room is different. And so it's only when you've done it enough times that you learn to trust the poem more than the audience and say, actually, you're wrong for not laughing at my jokes. But then, I mean, in part, it was during lockdown that was no longer possible. So I was then writing things without that usual final step of my process of just like checking if anyone else likes it and having to kind of back myself a bit more in what I was writing. But also I found it interesting because there was a period when I mentioned being in a comedy duo where we were writing comedy songs and then I was also writing poetry. So whenever I had an idea, I was like, oh, if this is uplifting or funny in any way, that should obviously go into the sort of the comedy duo. And so it meant the only poems that I were writing were the ones that didn't have anything funny or sort of joyful in them at all. So that was just a delineation, again, by vibe. Whereas actually I think that was too simplistic and that was too limiting, and some things need to be sat with and longer and some things need to be sort of hashed out. But also, what's more devastating sometimes than a poem that starts funny and then it like just actually stabs you in the heart, like at the end, because you have like the reader or the audience sort of laughing along and being like, oh my god, what? So to just be like, oh, funny, like pile A, and then sad. That goes in like the written poems. And I think I feel in general like in the past few years, what I've loved about my writing is it's been much more honest and vulnerable about the kind of the pain that's inside this as well, rather than trying to resolve everything. But that's meant that I've written what I think are some of my most sort of, well, I guess painful and sort of serious poems. But because, again, I've got this background of this kind of world of comedy, even within that, there'll be lines that I can't resist sort of just like bursting the tension slightly, or choosing to or not. And so then I would sort of, it was only in that live context where I'd be like, oh, okay, now this one's really heavy. Whereas actually, in comparison to everyone else who performed that night, it was a barrel of laughs. And so it's all sort of like relative to your own like body of work and what you're doing. But yeah. Are you up for me doing something, Burridge?
Yes, please.
Okay. A couple of weeks ago, I did a gig with Holly McNeish in Canterbury, who's just one of my absolute faves, and says she's got a new book out, and I was reading through it today, and I thought this one would be good to share, and I'm gonna stand up for it. So this is simply called Most People. Once a month at least, most people hold a saucepan in their hands, stir soup, make extra just in case. On Mondays, most people wake up hoping children will be safe, notice roses on a roadside and sigh. Most people make love nervously, worry afterwards whether their breath was fresh enough. Get embarrassed buying underwear, apologise when crying, blush when offering their seat to a stranger. On the hour, every hour, most people are not newsworthy. Every day we are watching the extremes. Most people do not make headlines, hands full of weapons. Most people are searching through the rubble, hoping loved ones may laugh with loved ones once again. Drawing curtains, searching for just a little rain the roots may glug enough to blossom into fruit again. There's too much sorrow, this is certain. But most people bring a cup of warmth to loved ones in the morning. Pray for peace when they are praying. Are you up for doing something borrowed?
I am. I'm going to read something it's a collection that I had on my bookshelf, but again, we're a room full of readers. If you're like me and you just buy books, and then you're like, I'll get round to that. And I run a workshop for the poetry school, and I have a guest. I have two guests. You could be a guest soon, Harry. I'd love to be a guest. But we had Ella Frias, a really stunning poet today, and she used this poem in her workshop, and I was kind of blown away by it, and so I thought I'd share that with you. It's by Sholmas Sharif, and the collection is called Customs, and the poem is called Social Skills Training. Studies suggest, "How may I help you, officer?" is the single most disarming thing to say, and not "what's the problem?" Studies suggest it's best the help reply, "My pleasure," and not "no problem." Studies suggest it's best not to mention problem in front of power, even to say there is none. Gloria Steinem says women lose power as they age, and yet the loudest voice in my head is my mother. Studies show the mother we have in mind isn't the mother that exists. Mine says, "What the fuck are you crying for?" Studies show the baby monkey will pick the fake monkey with fake fur over the furless wire monkey with milk without contest. Studies show to negate something is to think it anyway. I'm not sad. I'm not sad. Studies recommend regular expressions of gratitude and internal check-ins. Enough, the wire mother says. History is a kind of study. History says we forgave the executioner. Before we mopped the blood, we asked, "Lord Judge, have I executed well?" Studies suggest yes. What the fuck are you crying for, officer? The wire mother teaches me to say, while studies suggest, Solmas, have you thanked your executioner today?
Thank you so much. One of the reasons for sort of doing it in this particular format was that I was just aware of certain poets I knew who I would always see doing kind of 50-minute or 20-minute sets. And for me, it was almost giving people permission to share something new as part of the kind of inherent structure of the show was something that I was really grateful for, because it meant I would try and write new things each month. But very quickly, what became my favourite part was the Something Borrowed, because it was just hearing poets who I really love read poems that they really love, and also me trying to find a new poem every month was more difficult than I thought, but that was absolutely stunning. So thank you so much.
Right? And also I want to, anyone who writes like family and stuff like that, and there's always sort of that question in terms of permission, and yeah, maybe like fear or shame, or is it my thing to say? But yeah, that line about the mother, is it, what did you say, the mother in the poem is not the mother the mother in the mind is not the mother that exists. Yeah. So basically, if you're writing about your mother in your work, like I do a lot, just kind of give her that line. It's like, it's not the mother, you exist, and the work, the work mother is different, kind of thing.
You mentioned before we came on, you also were involved in a collection of poems that relevant to the theme of Something Borrowed were kind of alternative wedding poems.
Yeah, it's called Something New. Something New, alternative wedding poems for alternative weddings, which is in Margate Bookshop, which was really nice to see actually when I went in there. So I co-edited that with a brilliant poet, Caroline Bird, because we were kind of not fed up. We were interested in the fact that most people only kind of want a poem for anything if it's like a wedding or a funeral. So then suddenly you're sort of called up. It's just like, oh, I'm getting married. Do you have a poem? Do you want it? As if you could just, have you been asked to, like, I would suggest a poem or write one. Yeah. So they'll send you like a save the date like a year in advance, but they'll ask you to just read a poem like hours before, and as if you've just got this. And Caroline got married a few years ago, and she was like, even I was just like frantically Googling and being like, I don't know, she's one of the most well-read people that I know, and even she was like, I don't know, because suddenly if it's something traditional, you might think like, actually, can I read one of my favourites? So we set ourselves this task to put together an anthology of poems that could be read at weddings that are not the same old ones. Yeah. So you're not going to find a Shakespearean sonnet in there, but you might find a sonnet about dildos. That was probably the hardest thing about making that anthology. We were like, is it too sexy? Yeah. And then we'd be at the poetry library at the South Bank and both reading, like we had stacks of books, and then I'd be like, this one's really beautiful, and there are 100 poems in that as well, but actually it's really hard to get to 100 because so I was like, what about this one? And she was like, Rachel, that's an affair poem. So I not that one. Or it can be going really well, and then suddenly someone dies in the last line. You're like, I can't have that one either. So we realised actually that it would be much better a divorce anthology. That we'd have down. We can do love poems, but there has to be like a sad edge. Like the love has to be lost. But actually, it was a really hard task, but fun. Yeah. Now. Yeah. But at the time, like just stacks, not fun. Actually,
I do have a poem of mine that has been used sort of in lots of weddings. So that's now like my go-to when friends ask. Is sort of like I could do this one.
I invited you to be part of this anthology.
This is me making a pitch for the sequel. But also, it's interesting because like previously, the two love poems I had. One was about prime numbers and one was about dinosaurs. So they were good for a very specific couple.
That's what we wanted the book to be. Like, if you've got a Star Wars themed wedding, here might be your poem. So that's, I'm really annoyed.
But what you mentioned the divorce anthology, because I recently made a print of this poem. And again, anyone who had it at the wedding, that was then a really lovely thing that they could make. But my friend, I'm just going to out her on this live recording now. My friend Katie, who I did it with, was so excited by how well the print did. She was like, you should do a divorce poem so we can do a print ready for when all of these people end their marriages. Because then also you can sell 2 copies of each to each half of the couple. So as a sort of business decision, I got the logic, but it didn't come to me immediately. Are you up for me doing something blue? Yes. So, in fact, last month at this, my Something Blue was read from the print of that poem because the print itself was blue. And that just is a sort of indicator of how far I've run out of things that are even remotely blue to talk about in this section, whereas this feels actually like it is a bit more on point. And again, part of that daily practice of capturing whatever had happened that day meant there was at one point a question from my editor of, do you want the poems in the book to be presented in chronological order? Is it day 1 through to 100? Or do you want to group it more by theme? And for me, I felt quite strongly that I wanted it to not be that neat. So I wanted it to kind of jump around slightly because that reflected my experience of that. So this, I'm sure, comes after a really lovely poem in the book, but this is simply called There's No Use Crying Over Spilt Milk. But when it has been one of those days, when I am not so much struggling to spin plates as trying to avoid cutting my feet on the broken pieces, when I have had a rare full night's sleep and have woken up and am still tired, when I pride myself on trying to be a good husband, a good dad, and good at replying to emails, and today I'm not so sure I've managed any of those things. When said milk was pumped especially so I could take you out in the morning, which is my favorite thing to do, but today was hard as well. When I pour it from the bag into the bottle, but have forgotten to put the bottom in, so I'm left to watch it cascade from the side onto the floor. Crying doesn't feel like an entirely unreasonable response. But even on those days, when your mum is unsettled, because I am unsettled, because you are unsettled, when I love you feels like a plaster, when a hug feels like an I owe you, even on those days, you and I get to have a bath together, and we both get to use our favourite towels. And you wear your Crocs sleep suit that is so thick you pass out in a starfish position, and I love you so much that I could burst. There is no use trying to hold it all in when it's hard, and it's new, and it's lush. If it's going to spill over, then it's going to spill over. Why not let ourselves be overcome? Thank you so much for your poetry and your generosity. We're very happy to have you in Margate and hope to see you performing many more times around town. Are you up for doing something blue?
I will do something blue. You can take it all the way down, he says, impressed, his head high above yours, swimming, whether you're on the bed kissing down into child's pose, or if he's standing in the middle of the small blue kitchen and you're on your knees. Your eyes might water, but your throat doesn't waver. You never gag. If you said practice, he'd think you a slut rather than a bulimic. All those Christmas days, all those other days you ate like it was Christmas, all that practicing how to reach gut deep, deeper, almost spirit, how to drag out pleasure, go as long as emptying required.
Thank you so much. I always sort of start to wrap it up and then just go, and now I hand over to our guest for something blue to bring us home. And obviously the nature of the structure of it is that I now just want to sort of sit and think about that for a while. Thank you for your stunning poetry, for sharing everything that you shared with us. Can we give it up one more time for the fantastic, brilliant Rachel Long?
Something borrowed by Harry Baker. To all of my friends who are watching right now, thank you so much for being here. I'm in a good mood and you can't guarantee that these days